We need space, Marcus said, not even looking up from his phone. I stared at him across our kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hands. The morning light streaming through our bay window felt mockingly cheerful for what was about to become the worst conversation of my life. Space from what? I asked, though something in my stomach already knew the answer. We'd been married 3 years, together for 4, and I'd never seen him look at me with such indifference. He finally met my eyes, and the stranger staring back at me made my breath catch. From us, from this marriage. The words hit like ice water, each syllable deliberate and cruel. I've been thinking about this for weeks, Sarah. We're just not working anymore. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. Marcus, what are you talking about? Last month you said we should start trying for kids. Last week you were planning our anniversary dinner. He shrugged like we were discussing the weather. Things change. People change. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it, actually smiling at whatever message he'd received while delivering the death blow to our marriage. So, what are you saying exactly? My voice sounded small, desperate. I hated how pathetic I sounded, but I needed to understand what was happening to my life. That's when he smiled. Not the warm smile I'd fallen in love with, but something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. Don't worry, though, he said, like he was about to deliver good news. Mom's moving into the guest room tomorrow to help us figure things out. The world tilted. Your mother is what? She's going through a tough time with the divorce, and she thinks some space between us might help us gain perspective. He said it so casually, like this was a reasonable solution normal couples used. She has some really good insights about marriage. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and say he was joking. But Marcus just returned to his phone, scrolling through messages like he hadn't just blown up our entire life. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, my voice growing stronger with each word. You want space from our marriage? So you're moving your mother into our house? It's temporary, he said without looking up. Just until we figure out if this is worth saving. That's when I knew. The way he said worth saving like our marriage was a coupon he'd found in his wallet. The way he'd already made plans without consulting me. The way he kept checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be. My 3-year marriage wasn't just broken, it was over. And judging by how prepared he seemed, how comfortable he was with this conversation, it had been over for a while. I was just the last person to find out. When did you stop loving me? I asked quietly. This time he did look up, and for a split second I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across his face. But it was gone before I could be sure. I don't know, Sarah. Maybe I never really did. I met Marcus Thompson 4 years ago at Cafe Luna, that little coffee shop downtown with the mismatched chairs and terrible Wi-Fi. I was there working on a presentation for my marketing job, frustrated because my laptop kept losing connection. He was at the next table, nursing what looked like his 4th espresso and reading a paperback thriller. The Wi-Fi here is basically decorative, he said, noticing my obvious struggle. His smile was warm, genuine, the kind that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. But the coffee makes up for it. We ended up talking for 3 hours. He was an insurance adjuster with a dry sense of humor and an unexpected love for old movies. I told him about my dreams of running my own marketing agency someday, and he listened like every word mattered. When he asked for my number, I felt that flutter you read about in romance novels but never quite believe is real. Our first year together was magic. Marcus would surprise me with my favorite Thai takeout after long days at work. We'd spend weekends exploring antique shops and farmers markets, building inside jokes and shared memories. He met my parents and charmed them completely, helping my dad fix his ancient lawnmower and complimenting my mom's cooking until she blushed. He's a keeper, she whispered to me during Thanksgiving dinner. When he proposed on the anniversary of our first meeting, right there in Cafe Luna, I cried happy tears and said yes before he even finished asking. We planned a small wedding, nothing fancy, just our closest family and friends. Marcus seemed as excited as I was, talking about our future together, the life we'd build. After the wedding, I started house hunting with a fierce determination. We were living in his cramped apartment, and I dreamed of something that was truly ours. That's when I found the Colonial on Maple Street with its white shutters and wraparound porch. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew I was home. "It's too expensive," Marcus said when I showed him the listing. "We should look at something smaller, more practical." But I could see us there. I could picture Christmas mornings in the living room, dinner parties in the spacious kitchen, maybe children playing in the backyard someday. "We can make it work," I insisted. "I'll pick up freelance projects, work overtime. This house is perfect for us." I threw myself into making it happen. I researched mortgage rates, gathered financial documents, negotiated with sellers. Marcus seemed overwhelmed by all the paperwork, so I handled most of it myself. My savings account provided the bulk of the down payment, money I'd been carefully saving since college. "This will be our sanctuary," I told him as we got the keys, both of us grinning like teenagers. For 2 years, it was exactly that. We painted the bedroom together, planted a garden, hosted game nights with friends. Marcus would come home from work and find me in the kitchen, and he'd wrap his arms around me from behind while I cooked. "How did I get so lucky?" he'd murmur into my hair. I should have paid attention to when he stopped asking that question. Retry. The change didn't happen overnight. It crept in like a slow leak, so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. It started with Marcus's phone calls with his mother becoming longer, more frequent, and strangely secretive. He'd step out onto the porch or go into his home office, speaking in hushed tones that made me feel like an intruder in my own house. Diane Thompson had always been a force of nature, but her recent divorce had sharpened her edges into something cutting. She'd call during dinner, and Marcus would immediately answer, leaving his food to grow cold while I sat alone at the table. "Sorry, Mom needs to talk through some stuff with the lawyer," he'd say. But these conversations lasted hours and had nothing to do with legal matters. The first time she openly criticized me to my face, I was too shocked to respond. We were at Marcus's cousin's wedding, and I'd chosen a navy blue dress that I thought looked elegant. "Oh, honey," Diane said, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, "that color really washes you out. You should let me take you shopping sometime. I know what works for our family." Our family. Like I was a stray cat they'd taken in out of pity. Marcus just smiled and nodded. "Mom has great taste," he said, not even looking at me. "Maybe you should listen to her advice." That became the pattern. Diane would make cutting remarks disguised as helpful suggestions, and Marcus would back her up every single time. "Sarah's too career-focused," she'd tell him right in front of me during their weekly coffee dates at my kitchen table. "A good wife prioritizes her husband's needs first." That's what I did for Marcus's father, before he lost his mind and threw it all away. I tried to defend myself once, suggesting that maybe I could prioritize my husband better if he actually communicated his needs instead of discussing them exclusively with his mother. Marcus looked at me like I'd slapped him. "She's just looking out for us, babe. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That became his favorite word to dismiss anything I said. When I mentioned feeling excluded from their conversations, I was being sensitive. When I suggested maybe Diane didn't need to rearrange our spice cabinet during her visits, I was being sensitive. When I asked why he always took her side, I was being too sensitive to see that she was just trying to help. I started tiptoeing around my own home, trying to anticipate which version of Marcus I'd encounter each day. The loving husband who'd married me seemed to appear less and less, replaced by someone who looked at me like I was a disappointing roommate. Diane would show up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key Marcus had given her, and I'd find them deep in conversation that would immediately stop when I entered the room. "We were just talking about the best way to organize the garage," Marcus would say. But something in their expressions told me they'd been talking about much more than storage solutions. I began eating dinner alone more often, going to bed alone while Marcus stayed up late talking to his mother on the phone. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible except when I was in the way. The worst part wasn't the isolation. It was how normal they made it seem, like I was the problem for wanting to matter in my own marriage. 3 weeks before the space conversation shattered my world, Marcus did something that caught me completely off guard. I came home from work on a Friday evening, exhausted from a particularly brutal week of client presentations, expecting to find him and Diane deep in one of their usual conspiratorial conversations. Instead, I found him alone in the kitchen with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers, not the roses his mother always insisted were more appropriate. "Pack a bag," he said, grinning like the man I'd married. "We're getting out of here for the weekend." I stared at him, suspicious. "What about your mom? Doesn't she have plans with you tomorrow?" Diane had been coming over every Saturday for the past 2 months, a tradition that had somehow become sacred and untouchable. "I canceled," Marcus said, and my heart actually skipped. I told her we needed couple time, just you and me, no phones, no distractions, no other people. He emphasized the last part, and for the first time in months, I felt like he was actually seeing me. We drove 2 hours to a little bed and breakfast in the mountains, the kind of place we used to love before our lives got complicated. Marcus put both our phones in the glove compartment. "Emergency only," he said. "This weekend is about us." That first night, we talked like we used to. Really talked. We sat on the porch swing sharing a bottle of wine, and Marcus told me about the pressure he'd been feeling at work, about how his mother's constant crisis calls were draining him. "I know I've been distant," he admitted, his hand finding mine in the darkness. "I know you've been feeling left out." "I have," I said carefully, not wanting to break this fragile moment. "Sometimes I feel like I'm competing with your mother for your attention, and I'm losing." He was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing circles on my palm. "That's not fair to you. You're my wife. You should come first." The words I'd been desperate to hear for months, finally spoken in the moonlight. The next day, we hiked a trail that led to a waterfall, laughing and taking silly selfies like tourists. Marcus bought me a handmade bracelet from a local artisan, fastening it around my wrist with the same gentle concentration he'd shown when putting on my wedding ring. "I want to be better for you, Sarah," he said, as we watched the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. "Work stress, Mom's divorce drama, none of that matters more than us." I cried happy tears that night, curled against his chest in the unfamiliar bed, listening to his heartbeat, and feeling hope bloom in my chest for the first time in months. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he whispered back, his arms tightening around me. "I'm going to do better. We're going to be okay." We made love that night with a tenderness that had been missing from our marriage, and I fell asleep believing we'd turned a corner. I thought we'd remembered how to be us again. The drive home was filled with easy conversation and shared music, Marcus's hand resting on my thigh like it used to. I should have known it was too easy, too perfect, too much like a goodbye disguised as a hello. But hope is a dangerous thing when you're drowning. It makes you forget how deep the water really is. The morning after Marcus dropped his bombshell about needing space, I woke up to the sound of cabinets slamming in my kitchen. For a confused moment, I thought maybe I'd dreamed the entire conversation. Maybe we were still in that honeymoon phase from our weekend getaway, and Marcus was making me breakfast as a surprise. But when I stumbled downstairs in my pajamas, I found Diane Thompson standing in my kitchen like she owned it, systematically emptying my carefully organized spice cabinet and rearranging everything according to some system that made sense only to her. "Good morning, dear," she said without looking at me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She was already fully dressed at 7 in the morning, wearing one of her signature cardigans and that satisfied smile she got when she was particularly pleased with herself. "I've made some coffee, the real kind, not that flavored nonsense you usually buy." I stared at the coffee maker, where my vanilla hazelnut pods had been replaced with some industrial-strength dark roast that smelled like burnt rubber. My coffee pods, the ones I bought with my own money for my own kitchen, were nowhere to be seen. "Where are my—" "I threw those artificial things away," Diane interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. They're full of chemicals. Marcus needs proper nutrition, especially during stressful times like this." She said it like she was doing us both a favor, like my coffee preferences were a personal failing she was graciously correcting. Before I could process what was happening, Marcus walked into the kitchen, freshly showered and dressed for work. He looked calm, rested, like a man who'd slept peacefully after making the most important decision of his life. He kissed his mother's cheek, actually kissed her cheek in greeting, and grabbed one of my favorite mugs from the cabinet. "Thanks, Mom," he said, accepting the coffee like this was the most natural thing in the world. "You always know exactly how I like it." I stood there in my own kitchen, watching my husband and his mother perform this intimate morning ritual while I felt like an unwelcome stranger. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we need to talk about the living arrangements." He turned to me with that same detached expression from the night before, like I was a neighbor who'd wandered over to borrow sugar. "Right, we should discuss logistics." Logistics. Like our marriage was a business transaction being dissolved. "I can take the couch," I said, trying to salvage some dignity, some sense that I still belonged in my own home. That's when Diane laughed. Actually laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Oh, honey," she said, turning to face me fully for the first time. "Marcus and I discussed it last night after you went to bed. You'll be much more comfortable at your friend's place for a while, just until we sort everything out." The words hit me like a physical blow. They discussed it, last night, after I went to bed. While I was upstairs grieving my marriage, they were downstairs planning my exile. "We thought it would be easier for everyone," Marcus added, not meeting my eyes. "Less awkward. Mom's going through a difficult transition, and having too many people in the house might be overwhelming for her." Too many people. In my own house. I was too many people. "I see," I managed to say, though I could barely hear my own voice over the roaring in my ears. They'd already decided my fate, and I hadn't even been invited to the conversation. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was actually dying. But sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office building, I couldn't imagine walking into that fluorescent-lit space and pretending everything was normal. How do you sell marketing campaigns when your entire life has just been marketed away from you? Instead, I drove aimlessly through town until I found myself at Riverside Park, the same place Marcus and I used to come for weekend picnics when we were still figuring out how to be together. I parked under an oak tree and just sat there, crying until my eyes burned and my chest ached from the force of it. Everything I'd built, everything I'd invested in, not just money, but my heart, my time, my dreams, was being stripped away like I was some kind of squatter they'd discovered in their house. The casual cruelty of it was what destroyed me most. If Marcus had screamed, if he'd thrown things, if he'd shown any emotion at all, I could have understood it. People fight. People get angry. People say things they don't mean. But this cold indifference, this methodical dismantling of our life together while his mother rearranged my spice cabinet, it was like being erased while still breathing. I must have sat there for hours, because when I finally drove home, the sun was setting and my phone was full of missed calls from my boss. I'd deal with that tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to crawl into my own bed and pretend this was all a nightmare. But when I walked through my front door, I stepped into a house I no longer recognized. Diane's belongings had metastasized throughout the space like some kind of aggressive infection. Her romance novels with their gaudy covers were lined up on my bookshelf, pushing aside the marketing books and literary fiction I'd carefully collected over the years. Her collection of ceramic angels, dozens of them in various poses of prayer and contemplation, now occupied my mantel, where my travel photos and wedding pictures used to sit. My wedding pictures. I looked around frantically and found them stacked in a corner, face down, like embarrassing evidence of a crime. The bathroom was the worst part. Diane's prescription bottles crowded my medicine cabinet. Medications for arthritis, anxiety, high blood pressure, insomnia. Her anti-aging creams and hair products had claimed the entire counter, relegating my simple moisturizer and face wash to a small corner like unwanted guests. "Just temporary," Marcus had said that morning, but nothing about this looked temporary. This looked like a woman who was moving in permanently, who was claiming territory and marking it as her own. I found them in the living room, Marcus and Diane, sitting on my couch watching some home renovation show. They looked comfortable, settled, like they'd been living together for years instead of hours. Marcus had his feet up on my coffee table, something he'd never done when it was just the two of us. "How was your day, dear?" Diane asked without looking away from the television, her voice carrying that same false concern I was learning to recognize. "Fine," I lied, heading straight for the stairs. "Dinner's in the kitchen," she called after me. I made Marcus's favorite pot roast. Marcus's favorite. Not our favorite, not my favorite, just his. I found a single plate wrapped in plastic in the refrigerator, an afterthought portion that looked like it had been scraped together from leftovers. That night, I ate alone in my bedroom, listening to their laughter drift up from downstairs, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Riley Santos arrived at my door that evening like she had some kind of sixth sense for disaster. I hadn't called her. I was too embarrassed, too confused about what was even happening to my life to put it into words. But there she was at 8 o'clock, holding a bottle of wine and a box of tissues, her expression soft with the kind of concern that only comes from real friendship. "I brought reinforcements," she said, holding up the wine, "and I have a feeling we're going to need both." Riley had been my best friend since college, the kind of person who showed up without being asked and somehow always knew exactly what you needed. She was also one of the most successful real estate agents in the city, which was how she'd helped Marcus and me find our house 3 years ago. If anyone understood the investment I'd made in this place, it was Riley. We sat on my bed because the living room felt too exposed, too close to where Marcus and Diane were camped out like occupying forces. I told her everything, the weekend getaway that had filled me with false hope, Marcus's sudden demand for space, Diane's immediate invasion of our home, the casual way they'd discussed my exile without including me in the conversation. "They planned this," I said, my voice breaking. While I was sleeping upstairs thinking we were going to be okay, they were downstairs dividing up my life. Riley listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in her glass with the kind of focused intensity that meant her brain was working overtime. "Sarah," she said finally, her voice careful and measured, "I need to tell you something about your house." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What about it?" She set down her wine and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like official documents. "When you bought this place, do you remember all the paperwork we went through? The mortgage applications, the deed transfers, all those signatures?" "Of course, it was a nightmare, but we got through it." I paused, remembering. "Actually, you and I got through most of it. Marcus said all the legal stuff made his head spin, so I handled the bulk of it." "Right. And do you remember when Marcus came in to sign the final documents?" I tried to recall that day 3 years ago. It had been chaotic. Marcus had been running late from work, rushing in just as the title company was about to close. He'd signed a stack of papers quickly, apologizing for holding everyone up. "He signed everything, didn't he?" Riley's expression was strange, almost guilty. "He signed some things. But Sarah, look at this." She handed me her phone, showing me a document I recognized but had never really studied closely. "Look at the names on the deed." I stared at the screen, reading the legal text that was mostly gibberish to me. Then I saw it. My name, clearly printed in black and white. Just my name. "I don't understand," I said, though something was starting to click in my brain. "Marcus never got added to the deed," Riley said gently. "In all the chaos of closing, he signed mortgage documents and some insurance papers, but he never completed the ownership transfer. Sarah, you bought this house solo. The mortgage, the deed, the legal ownership, everything is in your name only." The wine glass nearly slipped from my hands as the implications hit me. "This house," Riley continued, "is entirely yours." I barely slept that night, Riley's words echoing in my mind like a mantra. "This house is entirely yours." I kept pulling up the deed documents on my phone, staring at my name, Sarah Chen, printed alone on the line that determined ownership. 3 years of assuming Marcus and I owned this house together, and it turned out I'd been the sole owner all along. At dawn, I was already dressed and making phone calls. The first lawyer I reached was sympathetic but busy, scheduling me for the following week. The second one had an opening that afternoon. "Bring all your documentation," she said. "Marriage certificate, deed, mortgage papers, everything." I spent my lunch break in attorney Jennifer Walsh's office, a sharp woman in her 50s who listened to my story with the kind of professional detachment that somehow made me feel safer. She reviewed my documents with methodical precision, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. "Your friend is correct," she said finally. "You are the sole legal owner of this property. Your husband has no legal claim to it whatsoever." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here?" "I need to know my options," I said. "My husband is demanding space from our marriage, but he wants to keep living in my house with his mother. Is that something I have to allow?" Attorney Walsh smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Mrs. Chen, you don't have to allow anything. This is your property. You can ask anyone to leave at any time, with proper notice, of course." I started documenting everything that night. I created a folder on my laptop titled Property Management and began recording the daily indignities. Marcus asking me to stay out of the living room while he and Diane watched their shows. Diane rearranging my furniture without permission. The way they'd speak in hushed tones whenever I entered a room. Conversations that would stop mid-sentence like I was some kind of intruder. I recorded some of their conversations too, using my phone's voice memo app. Massachusetts was a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations I was part of, or that took place in my own home. The recording from Tuesday night was particularly revealing when I overheard them discussing their future plans. "Once Sarah finds her own place, we can really make this house feel like home," Diane had said. "Maybe convert that office upstairs into a proper guest room for when your sister visits." "That's a great idea, Mom," Marcus had replied. "Sarah never really used that space anyway." My office, the room where I'd built my freelance business, where I'd worked late nights to help pay for this house they were so casually redistributing. At work, I threw myself into the Morrison campaign, a major account I'd been putting off because it seemed too ambitious. But now, staying late every night felt like a refuge. The office was quiet after 6, and I could focus on something I was actually good at, something where my opinions mattered and my contributions were valued. The campaign was for a local women's shelter, and as I developed messaging around themes of empowerment and independence, I felt something awakening in myself. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be confident, to trust my own judgment, to remember that I was capable of more than tiptoeing around other people's emotions. By the end of the week, I'd not only finished the Morrison campaign, but had impressed my boss enough to earn a promotion opportunity. "You seem different lately," she said. "More focused, more decisive." I was different. I was remembering who I used to be before I became someone who apologized for existing in her own home. Marcus and Diane settled into their new routine with the comfortable ease of people who'd finally gotten exactly what they wanted. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of their conversation drifting up from my kitchen. Intimate, conspiratorial discussions over coffee that would immediately stop if I appeared. Their morning ritual became sacred and untouchable. Diane would rise at 6:30 before Marcus's alarm and have fresh coffee waiting when he stumbled downstairs. She'd packed away my cheerful yellow mugs and replaced them with a matching set she'd brought from her old house, heavy, cream-colored things that looked expensive and felt cold in your hands. "Good morning, you two," I'd say when I came down for work, trying to sound normal, trying to pretend this was a temporary arrangement we were all adjusting to together. "Oh, good morning, dear," Diane would reply with that syrupy voice she used when she wanted to sound motherly. But she never moved from Marcus's side, never made space for me at my own kitchen table. "I've made coffee, but it might be a bit strong for your taste." Marcus would grunt something that might have been a greeting, but he never looked up from his phone anymore. Whatever warmth had existed between us during our weekend getaway had evaporated completely, replaced by this uncomfortable politeness you'd show a stranger you were trying to avoid. They had their own television schedule now, too. Every evening, they'd claim the living room for what Diane called their shows: home renovation programs, cooking competitions, and old sitcoms from the 80s that made them laugh like they were sharing private jokes. If I tried to join them, the atmosphere would shift, becoming stilted and unwelcoming until I'd make an excuse to leave. "We're watching this," Diane would say, if I reached for the remote, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "Maybe you can find something to do upstairs?" The worst part was how they'd begun talking about improvements to the house. My house. Like I wasn't even there. Last Tuesday, I came home to find them measuring the living room walls while discussing paint colors. "I think a nice sage green would brighten this space up," Diane was saying, holding fabric swatches against the wall. "This beige is so bland and depressing." "That's a great idea, Mom," Marcus replied, actually taking notes on his phone. "We should also think about replacing that old ceiling fan. It's pretty dated." The ceiling fan I'd specifically chosen and that Marcus had helped me install 2 years ago, the one we'd argued about for weeks, because he'd wanted something more modern while I'd loved the vintage brass finish. "And this furniture arrangement isn't working at all," Diane continued, gesturing dismissively at my carefully chosen pieces. "Everything should face the fireplace properly. I don't know why anyone would put a couch at that angle." I'd arranged the furniture that way so we could see both the fireplace and the bay window, creating a cozy conversation area that had been perfect for the dinner parties we used to host. But apparently, my design choices were just another thing that needed correcting. They started making lists, actual shopping lists for my house. I found one of Diane's notebooks on the counter, filled with her neat handwriting detailing everything from new curtains to kitchen appliances. "Marcus needs a proper espresso machine," she'd written, "and the guest bathroom needs completely redoing. That wallpaper is hideous." The wallpaper I'd spent 3 weekends carefully hanging because Marcus said he loved the vintage botanical pattern. They were planning a future in my house without me, and they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. 2 weeks into this nightmare arrangement, I was working late at the kitchen table, the only space in my own house where I felt somewhat welcome, when I heard Diane's voice drifting from the living room. She was on the phone with someone, speaking in that animated tone she used when she was particularly pleased with herself. I tried to focus on my laptop screen, but something about her voice made me pause. There was a smugness to it, a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "Oh yes, it's working out perfectly," she was saying, her voice carrying that false sweetness that had become so familiar. "Sarah will be moving out soon, and then Marcus and I can really make this place feel like home." My fingers froze over my keyboard. I held my breath, straining to hear more. "She was never right for him anyway," Diane continued, and I could practically hear her waving a dismissive hand. "Too independent, too career-focused. A man needs a woman who understands her priorities, not someone who's always running off to work late or fussing about her little marketing projects." My little marketing projects. The work that had paid for half of everything in this house. "Marcus is finally seeing what I've been telling him for years," she went on. "Some women just aren't cut out for marriage. They want all the benefits, but none of the responsibilities." I closed my laptop carefully, moving as quietly as possible to get closer to the living room without being seen. "The separation was his idea, of course," Diane lied smoothly. "He came to me for advice about how to handle it gently. I told him honesty was the best policy. Better to rip the bandage off quickly than drag out something that was clearly over." A sharp laugh escaped her throat. "Oh, she tried to put up a fight at first, acting like she belonged here. But she's accepting reality now. Young women today, they think they can have everything without making any sacrifices. Sarah's learning that marriage requires compromise she's simply not capable of." The conversation continued for another few minutes, Diane painting herself as the wise mother-in-law who'd helped her son escape an unsuitable marriage. When she finally hung up, I crept back to the kitchen table, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and something else, something that felt dangerously close to power. That night, when Marcus came home from work, he found me sitting at our dining room table with a cup of tea, looking calmer than I'd felt in weeks. "We need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the heavy sigh of a man preparing to deliver unpleasant news. "I agree," I said simply. He looked surprised by my easy response. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." He cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders like he was preparing for a business presentation. "I think we should make this separation official. Mom and I have been talking, and we both think you'd be happier with someone more compatible with your lifestyle." He actually used air quotes around compatible, like my desire to be treated as an equal partner in my own marriage was some kind of quirky personality trait. "I'll keep the house, of course," he continued, "since Mom's settled in now, and it would be disruptive to move her again so soon after her divorce. We can work out the financial details later." He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was the generous ex-husband graciously allowing me to walk away from everything I'd built. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, my voice steady as glass. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The next morning, I did something that caught Marcus completely off guard. When he came down for his ritual coffee with Diane, I was already dressed for work, sitting at the kitchen table with a genuine smile on my face. The first real smile I'd worn in weeks. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, and both of them froze like deer caught in headlights. They'd grown so accustomed to my defeated shuffling around the house that this sudden brightness clearly unsettled them. "Morning," Marcus mumbled, exchanging a confused glance with his mother. "You know what? You're absolutely right about everything," I announced, standing up and gathering my things. "I should move out. This arrangement isn't working for anyone." Marcus blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. "Oh, well, I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "More than reasonable," I said, slinging my purse over my shoulder. "I called my friend Riley yesterday. She's helping me with the transition." What I didn't mention was that Riley was coming over at 5 o'clock sharp with a very specific set of documents that would change everything. I went to work that day feeling lighter than I had in months. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, asking about logistics or timelines, I responded with cheerful cooperation. "Whatever works best for you," I wrote back. "I want this to be as smooth as possible." By 4:30, I was home, and by 5 o'clock, Riley was at my door carrying her leather portfolio and wearing the kind of professional smile she reserved for her most important clients. Marcus arrived home from work at 5:15 to find us sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of official-looking documents spread between us. Diane hovered nearby, trying to look casual while obviously straining to overhear our conversation. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, setting down his keys and approaching the table with curiosity rather than concern. "The moving paperwork," I said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Have a seat. This won't take long." He sat down, still wearing that slightly condescending smile he'd perfected over the past few weeks. "I have to say, Sarah, I'm impressed. I wasn't sure you'd handle this so maturely." Riley cleared her throat and slid a crisp, white document across the table. "Mr. Thompson, this is your official notice to vacate the premises. You have 30 days from today's date to remove yourself and all your belongings from this property." The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly, I thought he might faint. "What are you talking about? This is our house." "Actually," I said, my voice steady as stone, "it's my house." I slid the property deed across the table, pointing to the ownership line. "Read it." Marcus stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. "This can't be right. We bought this house together." Diane snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Marcus is her husband. He has rights." Riley spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd handled hundreds of real estate transactions. "Community property laws don't apply here. Mrs. Chen purchased this property independently with her own funds prior to adding Mr. Thompson to any ownership documents. Mr. Thompson never completed the paperwork to be added to the deed." "You can't do this to us!" Diane shrieked, but her voice cracked with the realization that we absolutely could. "The legal notice is valid," Riley continued, unperturbed by the outburst. 30 days is actually quite generous." Marcus looked between the deed and my face, searching for the woman who used to apologize for breathing too loudly. But she was gone. The silence that followed Riley's announcement was deafening. I watched Marcus's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and then a desperate kind of anger as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard before. "You can't just kick us out. I'm your husband. I have rights as your spouse." "Actually, you don't," Riley said matter-of-factly, pulling out another document. "Spousal property rights don't extend to assets acquired independently before marriage, especially when one party never established legal ownership." Marcus shot to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the kitchen floor. "I've been paying bills on this house for 3 years. I've done maintenance, I've contributed—" "Rent payments," I interrupted quietly. "What you're describing is essentially rent payments to your landlord." The word landlord hung in the air like a revelation. Diane had been reading the deed with increasing panic, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she traced the legal text. "This can't be legal. There has to be some kind of loophole. Marcus, call your lawyer friend from college." "I already consulted with my attorney," I said, enjoying the way Diane's face went pale. "Everything is completely legitimate." That's when Marcus really lost it. "You've been planning this whole time. You've been playing the victim while plotting behind our backs." His voice cracked with the strain of yelling. "How long have you known about this deed situation?" "Long enough," I said calmly. "You manipulative—" Marcus started, but Riley cut him off. "Mr. Thompson, I should mention that we have recordings of several conversations where you and your mother discussed forcing Mrs. Chen to leave so you could really make this place feel like home." Riley's voice was professional, but there was steel underneath. "Recordings that clearly demonstrate your intention to unlawfully exclude the property owner from her own residence." Diane's coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. Neither Marcus nor I moved to clean it up. "You recorded us?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I documented everything," I said. "Your request for space, your mother's immediate invasion of my home, your plans to redecorate my house, your discussions about my future living arrangements, all of it." Marcus stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Who are you? The Sarah I married would never—" "The Sarah you married would have apologized for existing in her own home," I finished for him. "But that Sarah is gone. You killed her when you chose your mother over your wife." Diane found her voice again, but it came out as a screech. "You can't throw us out on the street. I'm going through a divorce. I have nowhere to go." "You have 30 days to figure it out," I said simply. "The same amount of time you gave me to disappear from my own life." Marcus was pacing now, running his hands through his hair like a man unraveling. "We can fight this. We can get lawyers. We can—" "With what money?" Riley asked gently. "Legal challenges are expensive, and frankly, you don't have a case." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing and Diane's quiet whimpering. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the sudden shift in power. For 3 years, I'd been the one scrambling to keep up, to fit in, to earn my place in my own marriage. Now they were the ones grasping for solid ground, and I was the one holding all the cards. As I watched Marcus pace frantically around my kitchen and Diane clutch the shattered pieces of her coffee mug, something unexpected happened. The anger I'd been carrying for weeks, the resentment, the hurt, the desperate need for them to understand how much they'd wounded me, simply evaporated. In its place was something much more powerful: peace. Not the smug satisfaction I'd imagined feeling in this moment, not the sweet taste of revenge I thought I'd crave. Just a deep, bone-deep calm that I hadn't felt since before this whole nightmare began. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said quietly, and I meant it. My voice cut through Marcus's frantic muttering about lawyers and rights and unfairness. "I'm doing this because I deserve better than being a guest in my own life." Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. "Sarah, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," I said, and the word felt like exhaling after holding my breath for months. "We can't." Diane looked up from the floor, where she was still collecting ceramic pieces, her face streaked with tears that smeared her usually perfect makeup. "I was just trying to help my son," she whispered. "I was trying to protect him from making a mistake." "By making me the mistake?" I asked, not unkindly. "By convincing him that his wife was the problem instead of helping us figure out our marriage together?" She had no answer for that. Riley gathered her papers quietly, sensing that this conversation needed to happen without an audience. "I'll be in my car," she murmured, squeezing my shoulder as she passed. "Take your time." When the front door closed behind her, the three of us stood in the wreckage of what used to be my normal life. But looking at Marcus and Diane now, really looking at them, I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't losing anything worth keeping. Marcus, the man I'd thought was my forever person, had shown me exactly who he was when things got difficult. He was someone who would choose comfort over courage, who would let other people fight his battles while he stood safely on the sidelines. Someone who could look his wife in the eye and tell her she was too much trouble for his mother's delicate transition. And Diane? She wasn't an evil woman, just a broken one who had raised a son to be her emotional crutch instead of his own person. In her mind, she probably did think she was helping. But her help had cost me my marriage, and nearly cost me my sense of self. "I spent 3 years trying to save something that you ended the moment you decided I was disposable," I told Marcus. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even hurt. I'm just done." The truth of those words settled into my bones like coming home. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished, apologetic version of myself that had been tiptoeing around this house, but the strong, capable woman who had built a career, bought a house, and created a life worth living. "I don't need you to understand," I continued. "I don't need an apology, and I don't need closure. I just need you to be gone in 30 days, so I can start remembering what it feels like to matter in my own life." The woman who had married Marcus 3 years ago might have crumbled under the weight of his disappointment. But I wasn't her anymore. I was someone much stronger. 3 days before the 30-day deadline, I was in my garden planting new bulbs for spring when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I turned to find Marcus standing alone, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. His usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Where's your mother?" I asked, wiping dirt from my hands with a gardening towel. "At her sister's place in Vermont. She moved there yesterday." He shoved his hands deep in his pockets, a gesture I remembered from our early dating days when he was nervous. "She's going to stay there while she looks for her own apartment." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me wanted to ask if Diane had said anything about the past month, if she'd shown even a flicker of recognition for how she'd treated me. But I'd learned that some questions didn't have answers worth hearing. "I came to talk to you," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "before I leave tomorrow." I gestured to the porch steps, and we sat down with careful space between us, like strangers sharing a bench at a bus stop. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the jasmine I'd planted 2 summers ago when we still said we instead of I. "I messed up," he said finally, staring at his hands instead of looking at me. "I messed up so badly I don't even know where to begin apologizing." For a moment, he looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with at Cafe Luna. Vulnerable, real, without the protective shell of indifference he'd worn for weeks. "I let her poison everything between us," Marcus continued, his voice thick with something that might have been tears. "Every conversation, every decision, every moment of doubt, I let her turn it into ammunition against you. I was weak, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Sarah." The profanity surprised me. Marcus rarely swore, especially not with such raw emotion behind it. "I know you are," I said quietly, and I meant it. Sitting there in the fading light, I could see the genuine remorse in every line of his face. But sorry doesn't fix 3 years of choosing everyone else over me. He nodded, tears finally spilling over. I know it doesn't. He wiped his face with the back of his hand like a child. I keep thinking about that weekend we went away, how happy we were. How happy you looked when I finally put away my phone and actually saw you. The memory hit me like a physical ache. That weekend showed me what we could have been if you'd been brave enough to choose us. I wasn't brave enough, he admitted. I was terrified of disappointing her, terrified of standing up to her, terrified of being a bad son. So I became a bad husband instead. We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the sun set behind the oak tree where I'd hung a swing the previous spring. The swing Marcus had said was a waste of money since we didn't have children yet. Do you think, he started, then stopped. Do you think there's any chance we could try again? Start over? I could change. Some things can't be undone, Marcus, I said gently. Some trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt. He nodded again, accepting what I couldn't give him. I want you to know, he said as he stood to leave. I loved you. I know I did a terrible job of showing it, but I did love you. I know, I said. I loved you too. And that, finally, felt like goodbye. On moving day, I woke up before dawn to the sound of a rental truck rumbling into my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I watched Marcus load boxes with mechanical efficiency, his movements careful and deliberate. There was something almost ceremonial about it, the final act of a play that had run too long. I made coffee in my kitchen, using my yellow mugs for the first time in weeks. The taste of vanilla hazelnut felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. By noon, most of their belongings were gone. I found myself helping Marcus carry the last few boxes, not out of kindness exactly, but out of a desire for completion. Each box that left my house felt like shedding old skin, making room for whatever came next. Riley arrived just as Marcus was loading his final suitcase, her timing impeccable as always. She stood beside me on the front porch, both of us watching this strange, sad procession. How do you feel? She asked, as Marcus slammed the truck's back door. I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Not triumphant, not vindicated, not even particularly sad. I felt like myself again, maybe for the first time in years. I feel like I can breathe, I said finally. Marcus walked over to where we stood, his keys jingling in his hand. For a moment, he looked like he might say something profound, something that would somehow make sense of everything that had happened. Instead, he just nodded once and said, Take care of yourself, Sarah. You too, I replied, and meant it. I watched him drive away, the rental truck disappearing around the corner where Maple Street met Elm. Diane had already said her goodbyes, or rather, she'd left without saying anything at all, which felt more honest than false pleasantries. When the sound of the engine faded completely, the silence that remained wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Riley and I spent the afternoon reclaiming my space. We moved furniture back to where I wanted it, rehung my photos on the mantel, and replaced Diane's heavy cream mugs with my cheerful yellow ones. It was amazing how quickly a house could transform back into a home when the right person was in control. That evening, I sat on my porch swing, the one Marcus had called a waste of money, with a glass of wine and my laptop, working on a proposal for my own marketing consultancy. The Morrison campaign had gone so well that 2 other clients had reached out, interested in my services. Maybe it was time to stop building other people's dreams and start building my own. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I looked at my house, truly mine now, with its white shutters and the garden I'd planted with my own hands. I thought about the promotion opportunity at work, the business ideas I'd been too afraid to pursue, the future that stretched ahead of me like an unmarked map. I'm more than holding up, I texted back. I'm thriving. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that wasn't just hope talking, it was truth. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was full of peace, full of potential, full of a future I got to choose for myself. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's refusing to let someone else write your story. My story was just beginning, and this time, I was the only author it needed.